Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. Maybe a little bit. What a wonderful crowd at 10 p.m. And we're going to have a very light-hearted discussion about U.S. policy, U.S. foreign policy. So welcome, everyone. I'm Francine Lacqua from Bloomberg. And I could not be more happy to speak to this wonderful panel to try and understand these seismic shifts in U.S. foreign policy. So with us, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Governor of the state of Michigan, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, representative member of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce of the USA, and Ambassador Matthew Whitaker, permanent representative of the United States of America to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I'm just going to dive straight in because I know we have 1 hour and we have many questions also from people being here now. Governor, is the United States stronger or weaker on the world stage than it was 5 years ago?
Well, I think in the last 14 months, we've actually done a lot of damage, unfortunately, with regard to the ever-changing tariff landscape and some of the rhetoric, frankly. I am the governor of Michigan. We are intertwined with Canada. Our economies are absolutely intertwined, and I can tell you that the hurt at the beginning has turned to anger and has created a lot of stress in our state economy. We're feeling it. And as we've said all along, if you say no to Canada, you're saying yes to China. And I think that same rationale can be applied to all of our allies, our European allies. We are already feeling the brunt of it in our day-to-day. We know that the largest bridge, the largest transit between nations for the U.S. runs through the city of Detroit into Windsor, Canada. All of our automobiles go over 30 times over the course of production. And so the unpredictability, the instability, the putting our allies at arm's length has come with a big cost. And so I would say that there's opportunity to right the ship. But right now, I would say that we're in worse shape than we were in 14 months ago.
Congresswoman, what do you think is the state of U.S. foreign policy right now?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the governor. I think that the United States is very much in a compromised position compared to where we were 5 years ago. Our relationships with our allies are strained. Our commitment and demonstrated consistency on democratic values, human rights, also incredibly strained. And our domestic situation, I think, is reflecting globally as well, particularly economically. Skyrocketing inflation, tariffs, of course, have hurt Americans, and it has hurt and had a negative impact on the United States globally as well.
Ambassador?
Well, I'm going to have to disagree. I know everybody's surprised by that. But, first of all, obviously, as the U.S. ambassador to NATO, and I sit at the North Atlantic Council, and NATO's stronger right now than certainly it has been in the last 5 years. And it's probably stronger than it has been since the end of the Cold War. And what President Trump has done is bring a realism to just the challenges that America faces. And, we face a lot of challenge. I think it's an incredibly dangerous world right now. We have certainly an ascendant China that is going to be a strategic competitor of the United States for the next century, and how we respond to that is most likely to define where we end up as a country, and whether it's another century of America and what we offer to the world, or whether it's a century of China and what they bring to the world. I obviously am choosing and voting for the United States of America. And I think the second thing is we also have a very aggressive Russia that invaded their neighbor, that has been fighting a war that's almost in its 5th year in Ukraine. And so these challenges, together with many others, in fact, their no limits friendship that they've announced, I think presents some real challenges. But President Trump has been clear-eyed and realistic. And first he said, we need our allies, our friends, to be stronger. They need to be stronger economically, and they need to be stronger militarily. And ultimately, we are accomplishing that. And, it's like anything else. We're a year into this, and we're making great progress. But I just don't think you can look at right now and say it is or it isn't, because so far we've made amazing progress. But this is a long-term plan to reverse a lot of the trends that previous administrations have put on the United States of America.
Ambassador, do you believe NATO commitments should really be conditional on spending targets? And if yes, that means America first, so it's changing the relationship of NATO.
Well, I mean, so it's ultimately about capabilities. It's about readiness, and it's about lethality. And so the 3.5%, 5% that we did at NATO last year at The Hague certainly is a framework, but ultimately it's based on NATO capability targets that say, if there's a war, you're going to bring this many artillery pieces, you're going to bring this many tanks, this many infantry, and it is about capabilities. And the capabilities are becoming more sophisticated, more technologically important, more autonomous, and all of these challenges are going to require all of us to invest more. And but you can't make those investments unless you have strong economies. And that's where the United States of America, I think right now, with GDP growth of over 4%, can make these investments. And some of our allies do not have that growth, especially some of the old world European economies. But, you know, Germany is making great strides, great commitments. You see people on the eastern flank of NATO making huge investments at 5% from Poland and Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. So there's a lot of good news, but at the same time, we can't have an unequal alliance where the United States bears the burden. We can't have an unequal alliance within Europe, where certain European countries do a lot more than others. We need everybody to equalize and to get stronger together.
Governor, because you've led the Midwestern industrial state with deep ties to global trade that you've laid out at the beginning, how would you do foreign policy different to previous Democratic administrations?
Well, I can just tell you what our philosophy is in Michigan. You know, I am the CEO of a state. I am not on the federal level. I would simply recognize that it's very important for the United States to acknowledge and work together with our allies and remember who our adversaries are. When we say no to Canada, it forces the Canadian government to do things like talking to China about opening up their doors to some Chinese EVs. We've been working so hard to shore up our autos, and we're competitive. We're building some of the finest automobiles on the planet. But we see what has happened in Europe, how the market has changed with the influx of subsidized Chinese vehicles and what it has meant. And that's why we've got to be really smart. By making Canada, our adversary, we have now forced North America to open up the door to that very possibility happening across, our footprint in Mexico and Canada and the United States. And so the president has an opportunity to renegotiate USMCA. He negotiated it in the first place. Was it perfect? No, none of these never are perfect. This is an opportunity for him to renegotiate USMCA with perhaps make a few tweaks, but ultimately that has worked, and it is the backbone of our economy, not just in Michigan, but for the United States. And that's why I think if we want to continue to manufacture, we've seen 9 months of depression in manufacturing. This is the linchpin to remedying that, and he's got the opportunity to do it, and I hope he takes it.
Governor, do you think we're in a post-rules-based international order? Are we there yet? And what comes after it?
Yeah, I hope not. I don't believe that we are. And but I certainly think that that's open to debate.
Congressman, do you think we are in a new world order? We keep on talking about this new world order, but no one really knows what it is.
No, and I think, I think that Prime Minister Carney's remarks at the World Economic Forum were words that rung around the world in raising this question. But I think that also in his remarks, as well as part of this larger conversation, there was this undertone, this undercurrent, this suggestion that it was a rules-based order sometimes. And I think that is the issue that lies before us, is that in a so-called rules-based order, the rules for whom? Because for all too long, the rules only applied to the United States, Europe, its allies, and we would carve out exceptions for the global South. And I think that when you have a rules-based order where you carve out exceptions to our values, exceptions to our rules, eventually the exceptions become the rules. And I think that, to your original point, over the last 5 years, we've seen such a breaking and such a fraying of these alleged Western values that people wonder if it ever existed in the first place. So I don't know if it's necessarily that we are in a post-rules-based order. I think it's possible that we were in a pre-rules-based order. And we have an opportunity to explore what a world would look like if we upheld democracy, human rights, trade that actually centers working class people instead of accruing overwhelmingly the benefits of trade to the wealthiest. But if we reoriented a new era that could actually help people and show how foreign policy and healthy foreign policy can show up and help them in their lives.
I mean, we have a number of European leaders here, and I know that certainly behind private closed doors, they say, look, the one question I want to ask the U.S. is, if I'm in trouble, will you come and help me? Are you still an ally? Or do we need to really decouple or certainly de-risk? Your answer to that, Congresswoman.
Well, I mean, we are, of course, representing a broad spectrum of the United States here today. And I think I'm very grateful that we have, you know, it's unfortunate, I guess we have to speak to the elephant in the room, that the partisanship in the United States has made this question something that even has to be asked behind closed doors in the first place. I know that the Democratic Party is here for our allies. We are shocked at the president's destruction of our relationship with our European allies. His threatening over Greenland is not a joke. It is not funny. It threatens the very trust and relationships that allow peace to persist. And so I believe what I can say is that unequivocally, the vast majority of the American people do not want to see these relationships frayed, and they are committed to our partnerships and our relationships and our allies.
Governor?
I would just second that. You know, as I discuss, you know, what's going on in Michiganders' lives, it is always about the fundamentals. It is always about, can I put food on the table? Do I have a good paying job? You're a Midwesterner too, you know. They're good, hardworking people. And I think Michigan being the place that was the arsenal of democracy during World War II, where we retrofitted auto plants and built bombers to make sure that the Allies were successful. That's a source of pride. That's built in our DNA. And I think that what the Congresswoman said about the vast majority of Americans would understand, value, and encourage continued growth of the relationships. I think that is very true. It's what I see. Most people are not wondering, how come we haven't invaded Greenland long ago? They're wondering, what the heck are we doing over there? Because right now, I need some help here in the United States. The tariffs that have made a company downsize, or that have cost me $1,000 more because a tariff is really a tax. That's what Americans want our leaders to be focused on, and that's what I hear from Michiganders all the time. And so I do think that, yes, these relationships are valued by the majority of people in the United States. And right now it is a tough time, but that's why, as a subnational leader, I take my responsibility of making sure people hear this, and that I do whatever I can at the state level to grow these relationships.
Ambassador?
A lot to respond to here. First of all, I always think that the rules-based order discussion, for me, as somebody from Des Moines, Iowa, and that's actually a practitioner right now in a European capital at one of our key alliances, is a bit of a theoretical think tank, coastal elite discussion, because ultimately it's shared interests, it is shared responsibilities, and it is also what I would describe as a moment for the free world, for those that share a heritage, an experience, that share values, to step up and respond to the dangerousness of this world. And, I'm looking at the foreign minister from Latvia, a good friend of mine, and what I can tell you is, I'm doing this every day in Europe, and our allies are not saying that like somehow we're not friends anymore, or somehow that we've become adversaries. The Canadians, we work very constructively on all sorts of important issues. But, President Trump has identified certain things that needed to change. Try to be a dairy farmer and export your dairy products, you know this, Governor, to Canada. I mean, they had certain restrictions, certain protection in place, and it wasn't fair to the United States of America. And for a long time, and we had the same relationship with Europe, where there were just certain industries, farm products, couldn't be sent to Europe. Oftentimes, certain types of other products, including cars, Europe was not receptive to it. They had tariffs in place, restrictions, or non-tariff protections. And President Trump identified this, said this isn't fair to America. It's not fair to the American worker or the American farmer. And he has identified that. Now, when you change something, or when you have a difficult conversation in your family, we get uncomfortable. And that's what's been happening is fixing these long-term challenges that President Trump has absolutely identified. Because even though he's from New York City, he understands the American voter and people that I grew up with and people that I know and am friends with. And so he just has a way to channel sort of the working class American that wants a better shake, that wants a system that's fair, that they can get those opportunities and not have entire markets blocked or restrictive. And so, but I just have to, the fundamental premise that somehow anything's changed with our relationships with our allies. We're having difficult conversations, but we're actually having a lot of success too, and we're making a lot of progress.
Family feuds also end up in people no longer speaking to each other. So
we're nowhere close to that, though.
When leaders come and speak to you and say, does the U.S. have my back? What do you tell them, plain and simple?
I say, one, absolutely yes. I was the first ambassador confirmed by the Senate, and I was the first ambassador that was nominated by President Trump to go to NATO to make sure that NATO worked and that we got these big goals accomplished. I also say, everybody loves to read his tweets and comment about every single, Truth Social that he puts out there. He has, just as late as today, he said, I will be there for NATO. Those are our friends. The United States will always be there for NATO. And I know that's a bipartisan thing. We will show up if challenged, but we also expect, and this is so crucial, to all of our allies to do what Latvia is doing and so many other countries, and that is to step up to provide. Because remember, everybody wants to talk about Article 5. Everybody knows Article 5, that an attack on one is an attack on all. But Article 3 comes before that. And Article 3 says that each country will be responsible for its individual defense and its collective defense. And that's why countries like Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, and so many others are stepping up. And we just expect everybody to step up, to equalize with the United States, so that strength of all allies is what's going to guarantee the peace. Because we've had peace on the continent, in Europe, one that has not historically been peaceful, I might add. We have had peace in Europe for 80 years since World War II. And we need to continue that for another 80 years and beyond.
Is the perception, Governor, from allies changing also because people are seeing, some of the domestic policies? So it's ICE, it's immigration, and so they feel like it's a different America.
I can't speak to what others' perception is. I can just say, I've spent a lot of time talking with leaders from outside the nation. I've been spending quite a bit of time with my Canadian friends and counterparts. I mean, Michiganders love Canadians, and we are absolutely interwoven, our two economies. And I can tell you that there is a level of fear and concern that started off as hurt, because went from being an extension of our family to all of a sudden being talked about as though we're not allies, to anger. And that's real. It's palpable. I don't know, maybe they're not telling you, Ambassador, but they certainly have aired a lot of their fears with me, and fears about what our mutual economies, what it means for that as well. So, but I can't speak to what the perception is. I can just say that, allyships are built over lots and lots of time. Trust is built over generations, and it can be lost fast. And I do worry, what is the long-term consequence of some of the more recent policy changes in the last 14 months? I worry about that. I think a lot of people do, and I think it's reasonable to worry about it. We should always be fortifying our relationships with our allies and remembering who our adversaries are. As we look at what is happening, there's no question that the barrage and the change in policies have taken a toll. Is it foregone? Is it unredeemable? No. But it is my hope that we have leadership that recognizes, okay, right now, let's seize on USMCA. Let's get this done so that the people around the globe can see, all right, we are going to have a policy and it is going to stay. And that will, I think, settle a lot of the concerns that our allies are asking about the United States right now.
Congresswoman, what do you see as the single biggest shift in U.S. policy?
The single biggest? Well, I think zooming out beyond just this presidential administration, I think that what we are seeing is between President Trump's first administration pulling out of longstanding international agreements, then you have President Biden, who is opting back into some of them, such, for example, with the Paris Climate Accords. And then you have President Trump that's elected again. I think what we are seeing now is this idea that U.S. foreign policy is, and some of our more basic and foundational values-based commitments seem to be enacted based on the partisanship of whoever is elected, that we play hokey pokey with USAID, with the Paris Climate Agreement, with many of our commitments. And I don't think that that is good for the country. I think that what is best is for when we sign an agreement and when we're a part of it, we stay in it, so that they know that our commitments are reflective of our nation's values in a way that transcends partisanship. And so I think that instability is one, but then the other, I think it is hand in hand with the volatility on one hand. It goes far beyond just agreements, and it goes into real aberrations, I think, in interventionism, I think, a turning back on our commitment on human rights, as well as supercharging an economic regime that fuels the 1%. And I think that piece is the most concerning for everyday people.
I want to touch on China next. So, Ambassador, is China primarily an economic competitor? Is it a military threat, or is it like an ideological adversary?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that question is a good frame, because obviously from an economic standpoint, they present big challenges, especially as they corner the market on certain things like critical minerals and limit the exportation. You know, they control the refining and then limit the exportation. I think, you know, that certainly their economic coercion is a challenge. We saw with the Belt and Road Initiative that they were able to do around the world, you know, what that has done. I mean, obviously them controlling both ends of the Panama Canal. I mean, there are many things economically that China does. You know, we for better, for worse, I would argue, especially for Iowa workers, you know, we exported a lot of our manufacturing to China and to East Asia, and I think that was a terrible experience for a lot of Americans. Militarily, you know, they have been going through the largest peacetime militarization that we've ever seen in world history. And, you know, those of us that know history, that is typically does not end well when a country goes through a militarization like we've seen. They have more ships now than the United States, you know, and they are just moving at pace. I mean, they have big challenges, and so I don't want to suggest that, you know, no country can do these things without costs and consequences. But that's a challenge as well. And I think ultimately, and this is where President Trump, I think, you know, you're going to hear me say he gets a lot of things right, but I think in this case, he gets this especially right, is that he has, you know, a relationship with Xi Jinping that they can have a conversation, they can disagree, but it's not, they're talking to each other. And I think, you know, my experience, you know, I spent most of my career as a private practice lawyer, but then I was at the Department of Justice through, you know, 2 different administrations, and now at the State Department doing diplomacy. And what I can tell you is that conversation, that talking to your friends and to your adversaries can be very constructive. And I think that's what President Trump understands and is willing to do. He's willing to have those very difficult conversations so that we don't miscalculate or misjudge the intentions. But, you know, Xi Jinping's been very clear that the island of Taiwan is part of China. He has said that for the military to be ready by 2027, and you know, that certainly is causing a lot of concern, not only in the region but globally, as to what that means.
Are current export controls on advanced semiconductors too much, too weak, or about right?
Well, whoever wins the AI race is ultimately going to win the future. I think we all have seen where AI currently is, where it's going in the very near term and long term. It's going to change probably everyone's life. But the country, and it should be the United States of America, that has the best AI systems, that dominates AI and shares that with our allies, is going to be in a much better position. And, you know, the thing about this is, you know, I'm going to just say something that I think is an extraordinary truth, and that is, you know, that Elon Musk recently said that AI has to be truth-seeking. And if it's truth-seeking, it can find new physics laws that we didn't know existed. It can extend human intelligence beyond what we can even fathom right now. But the Chinese, as an ideological communist country, tries to control AI and what it thinks the truth is, and that leads to all sorts of crazy perversions ultimately in the AI, and will make it much weaker. And so, yes, I think absolutely managing. You know, not only chips, but how we make chips. And that's why, you know, the European company ASML that makes the machines that make the machines, I think it's crucial to control that technology and to make sure that the United States and our allies, you know, have the access to the best cutting edge technology. It's really crucial for the survival of our way of life, and really for the survival of the human species.
Governor, how do you see China?
Well, I always think of everything from the auto lens, right? And certainly we know that there are so many advancements that have happened in China that started in the United States but were brought to fruition in China. I was really pleased when the last administration started saying, all right, we are going to make investments in chips. We're going to be making these long overdue investments so that we can lead going forward in terms of advanced manufacturing. And, you know, the halt of that concerns me a great deal, because I think that it was an opportunity for us to catch up. China, you know, is without question, I think, a very real threat to a lot of the important things that Americans do every day to make a living, take care of their families. And so if we're competing on a level playing field, we're all for competition, but the fact of the matter is that they don't compete on a level playing field, and that's part of why I've always said tariffs need to be a part of a conversation. Understanding that we're holding everyone to a similar standard has to be a very important part of real fair competition, but that's not how it's been historically, and certainly I think that remains a very serious concern when we think about China and what their capacity is, and all of the tactics that they undertake to observe and learn from and steal our intellectual property remains continuous concerns on top of a lot of others.
Congresswoman?
No, I think China is, of course, an ascendant global power, growing very quickly, acting in its own self-interest. And oftentimes in Washington, there's this frame between conflict and competition. I think sometimes, depending on what's happening, that rhetoric can get a little conflict-driven. And I think that it's really a question of competition, and to the governor's point, fair competition. But when I think about that, I think about how the United States, if you want to assert oneself as a global competitor, the kinds of things that one would do in order to really assert that position is investments in science and technology, which We are gutting our NIH. We are gutting our health science research. We are cutting the very things that make us a global power in that respect in terms of government and public funded research, which is what allows innovation in a more broad sense as opposed to privatized research. An ascendant global power would invest heavily in innovative energy solutions so that it could be sovereign in that respect. And the United States at this point, instead of expanding our energy mix, we are actively narrowing our energy mix to become increasingly more reliant on fossil fuels instead of, in contrast to what you see is happening in China. Yes, they burn a very large amount of fossil fuels, but they have also invested dramatically in wind and solar and in energy innovation. And so to me, I see this as a question of competition and, of course, of trade, to the governor's point, but we have to make sure that we are having, I think, a reflection and a reflective conversation about how are we positioning ourselves to continue to offer the world the best of what America has to offer.
And to all of you, and Congressman, I'll start with you, would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
Ambassador?
Well, I mean, obviously that would be the president's prerogative as to how to deploy our military. I would just say that we have to deter and defend like we do here on the European continent. And most importantly, and I think one of the things that President Trump was able to accomplish by having NATO agree to 5% of GDP on defense and defense-related items is ultimately, that's now the international standard. That's the Koreans are planning to move out on that. We expect others in the Pacific to commit to that new global standard that we set at The Hague last year. But ultimately, sort of the plans to defend Taiwan and the president's trade space, I think for any administration, especially this administration, needs to be as broad as possible to manage that risk. And as a lawyer, I learned long ago not to play hypotheticals either.
I mean, if you talk about foreign policy, you're in the hypothetical business.
Yes.
Governor?
Contingency business.
Contingency business.
I guess I would just simply say that I think that Taiwan's independence, as I think Ukraine's independence, is just, and I think that it is it's in the strategic interest of the United States.
On Ukraine, what does victory look like?
Ambassador?
No, please. I'd love to hear your answer.
It is. The two that I am on the panel with are much more steeped in foreign policy than a governor is. But I do think that Ukraine's independence, keeping their landmass, and having the support of all the allies, I think is the goal from my vantage point. Go ahead, Ambassador. Do a better job.
I think, Congresswoman, I want to follow the order of protocol here.
Well, of course, there's no conversation about Ukraine that can happen without Ukraine, and so they, of course, lead in terms of setting their terms on this. But I think that overall, as a principle, we shouldn't reward imperialism, and I don't think that we should allow Russia to continue, or any nation to continue, violating a nation's sovereignty and to continue to be rewarded, and whose main lesson and takeaway is that they will gain And so what that looks like in the specifics, I think, is a deeper conversation. But on principle, I think that is what we should be pursuing.
Ambassador, if Ukraine cannot retake all occupied territory, should the U.S. still push them for negotiations?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I mean, Ukraine obviously is in the middle of an attritional war where in December, the Russians were willing to sacrifice 35,000 Russians, over 1,000 a day. In January, it was 30,000, so 8,000 a day killed or gravely wounded. And there seems to be no end in sight for their capacity to throw soldiers at the front, very similar to a lot of other Russian wars of the past. And you know, we're seeing how tough it is. And the Ukrainians have been brave. They continue to fight, you know, and be very innovative. You know, I was able to go there in November and not only go to Kyiv, like a lot of folks go, but go out to Kharkiv, to within, you know, less than 30 miles from the Russian border, and talk to the people that are fighting on the front line. And it was fascinating to hear their perspective and to learn sort of the lessons that are being there. But, you know, every single day that goes by, obviously there are small incremental gains that the Russians are picking up. And so this war has to end. This slaughter has to end. It's almost incomprehensible, the loss of life and the suffering that the Ukrainians are going through, especially as Russia attacks, you know, their energy infrastructure. I mean, it is horrible what is happening. The global world needs to stand up. But, you know, this war is being completely enabled by China. And China could call Vladimir Putin and end this war tomorrow and cut off his dual-purpose technologies that they're selling. China could stop buying Russian oil and gas. There are lots of opportunities for the world to put pressure on China. Any deal has, and this is something we agree on, has to be an agreement between not only the Russians, but the Ukrainians. And it has to be a deal that's acceptable to them. And, you know, my biggest fear is that the Ukrainians, I think, are willing to make a deal right now that's reasonable, that under the circumstances would be fair. There's really no fair deal here because, again, Russia invaded Ukraine and has been, executing this attritional war. But I just am not convinced that ultimately the Russians are ready to make a deal or ever will be able to make a deal. But, you know, I do pray for peace because this war needs to end. It's horrific. You know, we see it every day. And it has to end. And President Trump is going to use everything he possibly can to continue until it's either possible or impossible.
I think we will have time for a lot of questions from the floor. Maybe just one question on Iran. Congressman, I don't know if you want to start us off, but basically, would you support direct U.S. military strikes on nuclear facilities if diplomacy fails with Iran?
I mean, I think that is a dramatic escalation that no one in the world wants to see. Right now, what the Iranian regime is doing, particularly with respect to protesters, is a horrific slaughter of, some estimates have tens of thousands of people. Now, I think that jumping into strikes, I think that right now we have so much, to me, there's still so much runway, so much that we can do to avoid that scenario.
Ambassador?
Obviously, the Iranians saw that President Trump is a man of his word when he said they can't have nuclear weapons and drew that as a red line. We had Midnight Hammer, and that completely obliterated their nuclear ambitions. Obviously, then we had what the president was able to execute in Venezuela, where he had again drawn a line, provided for diplomacy. Maduro was unwilling to make a deal. President Trump executed just, a really incredible demonstration of American capabilities that, a lot of our allies noted that, both those opportunities and said, we like you as our ally because only the United States of America can do certain things. And, he's willing to use those powers to enforce when diplomacy fails. In this case, I do believe that he is willing to negotiate with the Iranians, but there are two things that he has made very clear. One is they have to abandon their nuclear ambitions. And the second thing is that they have to stop brutalizing and killing protesters on their streets. Those seem both very rational. Remember, Iran is the #1 exporter of terrorism. They support the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah. They have caused all sorts of chaos and anarchy and death and destruction in the Middle East. And I think both those positions that President Trump is trying to get, first through diplomacy and then, if necessary, through kinetic means. I mean, I think, he holds all the cards. And, if there is a regime change in Iran ultimately, whether it's through the people's peacefully protesting or whether it's through some other intervention, ultimately the world is a better place and the Iranian people are better off, because an Iranian democracy that was not hostile to its neighbors would change the entire complexion of the Middle East. And I think we all understand that.
Governor, given all the conversations that we've had, what worries you actually the most? I know you talked about trade and tariffs, but what worries you the most on U.S. foreign policy right now?
Trade and tariffs are front and center, but I do think that, your comments with regard to Iran, I hope that there is a diplomatic solution with those twin stars as the goals and successful. That's what I think we would all like to see. I do worry that often we see a change in regime without a plan for what comes next, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. So the long-term question I continue to have on that front. But in terms of foreign policy that's coming out of the United States, I think that, the damage that has been done from alienating allies through tariffs, I think is going to take a long time to recover from, and that will continue to vex us as a nation. And that's a concern that I have.
Thank you so much. So it's time for questions from the audience. So if I could see a quick show of hands, and I won't forget that we also have people here at the back, but don't be shy, hands up. Yep. Could I have a microphone here for the front row, and then we'll go front row here first. It's the first one I saw, and then we'll go to the third row.
Hello. Thank you so much for the interesting conversation. My name is Hagar. I'm from Israel. I'm a journalist for Haaretz, and my question is for Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. I wanted to know if you think that the Democratic presidential candidate in the 2028 elections should reevaluate military aid to Israel.
I mean, to me, this isn't just about a presidential election. Personally, I think that the United States has an obligation to uphold its own laws, particularly the Leahy laws. And I think that, personally, that the idea of completely unconditional aid, no matter what one does not make sense. I think it enabled a genocide in Gaza. And I think that we have thousands of women and children dead that was completely avoidable. And so I believe that enforcement of our own laws through the Leahy laws, which requires conditioning aid in any circumstance when you see gross human rights violations, is appropriate.
Ambassador, do you want to jump in on that?
We have a board of peace in place. We have special envoys. The Middle East. I'm happy to talk about Iran. Obviously, I'm not going to wade into a Democrat primary and what their candidates should believe. So,
should U.S. military aid? Do you think it's aid to Israel be conditioned on specific human rights benchmarks?
I think we have a great relationship with Israel as an ally. They're one of our closest allies. We not only the United States but other allies buy and sell military equipment to Israel. Certainly, we need to continue to monitor these situations. Whether it's what Hamas and the IDF, fighting with each other, and what that caused in Gaza, and the suffering that caused. But I mean, I think ultimately, the administration has not made the determination that anything should change in that relationship at this time.
Another question. I think I have one. Yeah, so third and then fourth. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Joelin Nämäki from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. I wanted to ask, because we've heard today a lot of discussions about joint values and interests, but how would you like the United States to be perceived by the rest of the world?
It's a good question, Governor.
I think the way that we used to be perceived by the rest of the world as the good guys who you can count on, who show up when you need help, and is a place where people aspire to go and learn from our universities and become a part of our economy and a beautiful part of the tapestry that makes the United States what it is, which, is the a melting pot of people with different views from different parts of the world who want to solve problems and lead. And I think that's what I would love for the world to think of the United States. And I do believe it's still possible.
I'm going to take a question here. Oh, we're jumping around a bit, and then I'll go back to the last row.
Thank you. My name is Christian Schweppe. I'm a German journalist and wrote a book about the German Zeitenwende. And my question is to the ambassador. There are some European allies in NATO which are starting to question the purchase of the F-35. So I'm wondering, can you absolutely rule out that there is a possibility of this administration to delay or hold back the delivery of ordered F-35 if in any event the president would believe it's a tactical advantage? So can you rule out that what is delivered what is ordered will be actually delivered on time by the U.S.?
Yeah, well, I was just at the F-35 plant in Fort Worth about a month ago and saw a lot of countries' F-35s rolling off the line. And first of all, the capabilities are unmatched. It is an incredible platform, because it's more than a fighter jet. It is really an incredible piece of technology. I think there'll be 600 F-35s here in Europe owned by our allies in the very near term. And there is no threat right now for President Trump to withhold F-35s. It's our allies that are threatening to not buy them. But again, I think we're going to get through all this. It is very. I was at the John McCain dinner tonight before I came here, and Chancellor Merz was chairing it, and he was going around the room and kind of alternating between European leaders and the Americans, both members of Congress and Senator Lindsey Graham was there, and somehow the microphone came to me, and I said, what we do at NATO is carry water and chop wood. Sort of the political winds, and especially the media hyper reaction to every single thing that happens in American politics, it just doesn't disrupt us. We just literally every day show up, we carry water, we chop wood, because our adversaries are not going to wait for us to be ready. They're not going to wait for us to be more capable, and they're not going to wait for Europe to rearm and be strong. We really ultimately have kind of what's been described as a synchronous problem, or simultaneity problem, where Russia and China, because of their relationship now, and especially the Russian dependence on China, could move in concert. The United States cannot fight a multi-front war like that, and what that would require. And so that's why we need our European allies so strong as fast as possible. And those F-35s are a key pillar of that strength. And that strength, again, is going to deter and guarantee the peace for generations to come. But if we don't accomplish this, this project we're just starting, quite frankly, and less than a year into, if we don't accomplish this, if we let the political winds and the noise get in our way of doing the work, of carrying the water and chopping the wood, then we're all weaker for that. Because the strength is in the alliance, but the strength in the alliance comes from the strength of every member of that alliance.
We have a question at the back.
Carol Schaefer from The Nation magazine. My question is to all participants. What is your response to Chancellor Merz's remarks today? We all wish. I'm kidding. What is your response to Chancellor Merz's remarks today and his claim that the transatlantic relationship is forever changed? And what do you think the future holds if the United States really does go it alone?
Who wants to start?
You haven't spoken.
I think that the world has changed. The world has changed. I don't think that it is controversial to say that. I don't think that the president can act the way that he has acted towards Greenland. I don't think he can institute the not just the terrorists, but the rhetoric towards our Canadian neighbors without consequences. This is the most powerful seat in the free world. And we can't just say anything and do anything and pretend that it's a joke and that it doesn't have real consequences to our allies and to their sense of trust and safety. But that being said, while the world has changed, again, I have to return and reiterate to the point that the vast majority of Americans are not reflected and their will is not reflected and their commitments are not reflected in these actions. And so while there is that kind of volatility in what we've been seeing at the top, which again I think is connected to domestic politics, I think that as the president struggles at home, he, in my view, is making rash decisions globally. I still think that the commitments are there and the commitments of everyday working people are there, and they are not being reflected in those decisions, which I think is actually a good thing. It's not; those things are not reflective, to the governor's point earlier, of a deeper shift in the American electorate and the American people.
I'm going to have to disagree with the entire premise of the question because I think Merz is a better chancellor than Merkel, and I'll tell you two reasons why. First,
I don't think that was the question, Ambassador.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay. I'm kidding. I know that. I said the premise, not the actual question. You know, first of all, he moved at pace to eliminate Germany being dependent on Russian oil and gas. That's crucial. You cannot have Nord Stream 2. We told them not to have Nord Stream 2. They did Merkel did Nord Stream 2. Chancellor Merkel did it. And that was a terrible mistake. And it really gave a lot of money and resources.
I think she just misspoke.
I know. Yeah. The second thing is that he is moving at pace with 3.5% and the 5% NATO spending, which is crucial to the NATO alliance because Germany is the biggest European economy. And so, you know, I just ultimately, what was the question?
So should I repeat the question?
Well, just give me the.
So the top line.
Yeah.
Is,
I got distracted by the whole chancellor thing.
Do you worry that the Chancellor Merz has said that basically we're going to decouple? I mean, are we going to decouple from?
We're not. No, we're not.
The U.S. and Europe.
No. And I think this is a kind of a think tank sort of theoretical. I push back on this every single day.
This is the German chancellor that said this. It's not a think tank.
I didn't say he was perfect. I just said he's better. But in all seriousness, I do believe that this fear, and that's what it is. This fear. That somehow the United States is going anywhere, or that we are, going to recede back to our, protection between two oceans is just, I think it causes alarm. It's not true. It's not what's happening. Actually, we are continuing to show up every single day at NATO. We continue to show up and work hand in hand with our allies, and helping them get stronger and more capable. And that again, when I talk about carrying water and chopping wood, that's what it is fundamentally every single day. And so, and Germany is a great ally. I will point that out. Their willingness to step up, to share the burden of the continent's security. Conventionally, I think has been admirable. I told him that when I talked to him tonight, and I will continue to encourage them and remind them that the United States of America keeps showing up, and we will keep showing up. We just expect our allies to be equally as strong.
Governor?
So the question was about Angela Merkel? I'm joking, of course. I would say, as the Congresswoman said, right, yeah, the world's changed. It has changed. I don't know that anyone can say that it hasn't. We feel it on the ground in the United States as well, in a lot of really fundamental ways. All of that being said, I don't think that it is a permanent, irredeemable change. I think that someone recently said to me, trust is earned 1 teaspoon at a time, and it's lost by the buckets. So I think about that as a vivid example of it will take time to rebuild, but I am confident that we will do that. And it doesn't have to start happening after the next presidential election. I think by showing up, by showing that there are Americans who see the world differently, who value the transatlantic partnerships, who understand the chaos that a lot of the policy changes have wreaked on all of our economies, is part of that reconciliation. And I am hopeful. I continue to be hopeful that the current occupant of the White House will make some decisions that perhaps put us in a stronger position on this. I don't know that that's going to happen, but I'll continue to do my part, and I am confident that ultimately America will be the ally that we have been and we will continue to be. But the terms will have changed somewhat. And the fact that European nations are beefing up when it comes to defense and making investments, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. And so change isn't all bad, but I think that there's going to be a lot of work ahead for us to have that mutual trust that we are allies and we show up for one another and that we will have one another's backs.
Final question.
Thank you very much for this great panel. My question goes to the ambassador. Actually, I've seen you. My name is Alisa Vogt. I'm here with the group of the Munich Young Leaders. And I've actually seen you last week at the kickoff and the launch of the report. And you said something that struck me. You said that sort of one of the criticisms that you had towards some of the European states, I hope I don't misquote you now, was sort of the religion of climate change and sort of what that did to energy policy. Today we were attending one of the climate change panels where there was a lot of talk how climate change is a security issue, of course, as well. And I was just wondering how that question is reflected in your work at NATO.
Well, we focus on security, deterrence, defense, readiness, lethality. And I think that Europe has one of the reasons that their economy, I'll start with, it's hard to talk about Europe writ large because there are individual countries and each one is doing something a little different. But on climate change, I think I can speak a little more broadly, and that is that energy prices are 2, 3, and in the UK's case, 4 times that of the United States, electricity, and that you can't build things, you can't make things if the United States can make things with its input costs dramatically lower, and I have I'm not going to sit here and especially in this crowd and kind of be a climate denier. I'll be a climate skeptic. But what I can say is Europe had literally tied both hands behind their back and wondered why they weren't competitive economically and a lot of it's because of energy. And, UK is a prime example. They have a large natural gas field sitting right off their coast that they're unwilling to exploit and use, for their own security to lower the prices. And I think it has been ultimately each country's sovereign choice as to sort of how they want to reflect their belief in global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it. It morphs and it changes to meet whatever the need is. But ultimately, you need to be competitive with energy. You have and Germany got rid of, and another Angela Merkel thing, they got rid of all their nuclear base load, and that is, I think, a huge mistake as well. And so electricity is going to power AI. And as I said earlier, AI is ultimately going to determine who wins the future. And so if you can't be competitive on energy, you're not going to be competitive on AI, and ultimately you're going to be behind. And that's unfortunately where a lot of European countries find themselves currently, and they're going to have to reconcile that ultimately.
Okay, final question from me. How do you think that U.S. foreign policy or U.S. policy will change after the midterms? To each of you, but in 30 seconds, because it is already 11 p.m. or a minute.
My hope is that there's more robust debate in Washington, D.C., and that's how foreign policy changes. But I'll hand it over to the Congresswoman who's going to be more a part of that conversation.
Well, of course, as a Democrat, we're working hard to try to win these midterms. And should that happen, I think we will see an increased commitment to our global commitments, particularly in public health, in humanitarian assistance that was gutted most recently. And my hope as well is that we will also see a much more forward-facing posture to show that Congress can serve as a check on the volatility that we are seeing out of the executive branch, and that we can reaffirm our commitments and we can reassert our values, and that the world will be able to see a broader scope of American perspectives on foreign policy.
Ambassador.
So in 2019, after the midterms in the first Trump administration, I was the first cabinet official to go testify in front of the House Judiciary Committee. And it did not, those 2 years certainly did not provide a more stable, robust debate, good for the American people. It started off and really continued through for 2 years where not much was done ultimately. And, right now as we sit here, we have DHS has been shut down. And, it is maybe a preview as to sort of some of these internecine fights that we're going to see if the midterms, change the balance of power in Washington, D.C. But, I think as somebody that just lived through this shutdown previously, right at the first of the year, and somebody that lived through the longest shutdown as Attorney General in the last Trump administration and had to manage that in a very difficult situation. I hope we can find a place where the important work that we're all doing can get accomplished in a way that serves the American people. Because I think that's my biggest, frustration as somebody that's from Iowa, that's never been in an elected office, is that, at some point in time, this thing needs to work. And we need to lead, and we need to get things done on behalf of the American people. And I think there's bright news coming up in 2026 for the president, and that is the big beautiful bill is going to take effect. There's a lot of good things that should increase economic activity for the benefit of the American worker, and that when that all takes place, I think the American people will make the right choice.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, Congresswoman, and Governor, for joining us this evening for the nightcap. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you.